October 17th, 11:42 p.m. A small apartment kitchen lit only by the refrigerator door left slightly open. The hum of the motor fills the room. A glass of water sweats quietly on the counter. Outside, traffic moves in distant waves, unseen, anonymous. He stands there unmoving. The message is still open on his phone. 3 dots had appeared, then vanished. No reply. And strangely, nothing inside him lunges to fix it. No draft explanation forms in his head. No imaginary courtroom assembles where he defends his tone, clarifies his intention, reconstructs what he meant to say. The old reflex, the urge to be understood, does not arrive. For years it always arrived. In meetings, he would mentally annotate his own sentences while others were still speaking. With friends, he would adjust stories mid-telling, recalibrating to their faces. In relationships, he would prepare closing arguments before conflict even began, anticipating objections, softening edges, rehearsing sincerity. As if life were a constant cross-examination. But tonight something is different. The refrigerator light clicks off, the room dims, he doesn't turn it back on. And in that darkness you can almost feel it, a shift so quiet it makes no announcement. From a Jungian perspective, the ego often builds itself through reflection. We learn who we are by watching how others respond. Approval stabilizes us. Misunderstanding destabilizes us. The psyche, hungry for coherence, keeps seeking mirrors. But there comes a threshold moment when the mirror stops governing identity. It doesn't shatter dramatically, it simply loses authority. He walks to the window, the glass reflects his silhouette against the night, not crisp, not detailed, just an outline. Years ago that blurred reflection would have unsettled him, he would have needed sharper edges, clearer confirmation. Now the outline is enough. You can almost feel the internal stillness settling, not the stillness of defeat, not the silence of resignation, something denser, like gravity returning to its proper center. This isn't indifference, he still cares, but the care has changed direction. There was a time when misunderstanding felt like erasure. When someone saying, "That's not how I see you," would echo for days, he would re-explain himself in the shower, reconstruct conversations while driving, rewrite messages he never sent. He believed clarity would save him. But clarity became a performance. Carl Jung believed that much of early adulthood is spent forming the persona, the mask that negotiates society. It adapts, refines, corrects itself. It wants harmony. It wants coherence between inner and outer worlds. Yet the persona has a hidden exhaustion. Because if you are always adjusting yourself to be understood, when do you simply exist? Tonight, standing in the dim kitchen, he feels something almost unfamiliar. He does not want to draft a better version of himself. The silence stretches, no anxiety fills it. That's when it becomes undeniable, the old hunger is gone. Not suppressed, not forced away. Gone. There's a peculiar calm in realizing you are no longer trying to manage how you are perceived. It feels almost dangerous at first, as if you've dropped a tool you once depended on. Who are you without that tool? He leans against the counter, arms folded loosely. The absence of internal noise is startling. No rehearsals, no imagined rebuttals, no internal committee voting on the best explanation. Just presence. You can almost feel the ego loosening its grip, not collapsing but softening, as if it no longer needs applause to confirm its existence. And here is the unsettling part. Nothing falls apart. The world outside the window keeps moving, cars pass, somewhere someone laughs, the night does not punish him for not clarifying himself. For the first time, he senses a boundary that does not require defense. Years ago, silence after being misunderstood would have felt like abandonment. Now it feels like space. He thinks of past arguments where he over-explained, where he tried to narrate his own character as if others were jurors. He remembers the tightness in his chest, the urgency to be seen correctly. That urgency is absent. In its place is something heavier. Sovereignty. It doesn't shout, it doesn't posture, it simply stands. From a Jungian perspective, individuation is the slow process of separating from collective expectations and internalized mirrors. It is not loud rebellion, it is quiet differentiation, the moment you stop negotiating your essence for comfort. That process rarely announces itself. It arrives in ordinary rooms at ordinary hours. Like this one. Midnight approaches, the phone remains untouched on the counter, the message thread still unresolved. And he feels no compulsion to reopen it. This is the turning point most people miss when it happens to them. There is no ceremony, no declaration. Just the sudden realization. I don't need to correct the narrative anymore. And that realization is both freeing and terrifying. Because if you are no longer fighting to be understood, who are you becoming instead? He turns off the kitchen light completely. The room disappears into darkness. And in that darkness, something within him steps forward, not louder, not brighter, but unmistakably more solid. Something that does not ask for confirmation. Something that does not explain itself. Something that might change everything. The next morning, 6:18 a.m. pale light presses against the bedroom curtains. He wakes before the alarm. For a split second, the old reflex tries to return, a flicker of unfinished business, the unresolved message, the unclarified tone, the possibility of being misread. But it fades before it gathers force. He lies there, staring at the ceiling. The room is quiet enough to hear the radiator ticking as it cools. There is no mental reconstruction of last night's conversation, no imaginary dialogue where he sharpens his phrasing. Something inside him has closed. For years, his mind operated like a courtroom that never adjourned. Every interaction entered into evidence. Every misunderstanding demanded a defense. He would mentally summon witnesses, past examples of his loyalty, his kindness, his intentions. He would polish statements, refine arguments, anticipate cross-examinations that never came. And the strange part, no one had actually put him on trial. From a Jungian perspective, this inner courtroom is often the shadow of early adaptation. At some point in life, being misunderstood may have carried consequences: rejection, distance, subtle withdrawal of affection. The psyche learned to preempt pain by over-explaining itself. Clarify before you're condemned. Explain before you're abandoned. It worked for a while. But the strategy quietly became identity. He would introduce himself through disclaimers. I didn't mean it like that. Maybe I'm not explaining this well. Let me rephrase. The language of self-correction became fluent. Now, lying in the early morning stillness, he senses something profound. The courtroom is empty. No judge, no jury, no prosecution. Just silence. He sits up slowly. The floor is cold against his feet. In the bathroom mirror, his reflection looks the same as yesterday, same eyes, same faint crease between his brows. But something subtle has shifted behind the gaze. There is less searching. You can almost feel the psyche withdrawing energy from external arbitration, as if the ego has decided it no longer needs constant validation to confirm its shape. Carl Jung believed that individuation requires a confrontation with the parts of ourselves that were built for approval rather than truth, not to destroy them but to outgrow their dominance. This is what that feels like. Not dramatic, not triumphant. Quietly irreversible. He brushes his teeth without rehearsing future conversations. The mind, once a restless editor, now allows thoughts to pass uncorrected. And with that freedom comes an unexpected discomfort. If you are no longer preparing to justify yourself, what fills the space? For some, the silence feels like loss. The habit of self-explanation can become a companion. It provides a sense of control, the illusion that if you just articulate yourself perfectly, harmony will follow. Letting go of that illusion is destabilizing. He pours coffee, steam rises in soft spirals. He watches it without interpreting it as a metaphor, without extracting meaning, just steam. There is a steadiness in him now that feels almost impersonal. He thinks of conversations years ago where he bent himself into clarity, where he softened truths so they would be digestible, where he added context to emotions that needed none. He remembers the exhaustion afterward, not from conflict but from performance. Because explaining yourself repeatedly is a subtle form of self-doubt. It implies that your raw presence is insufficient. From a Jungian perspective, the persona thrives on refinement. It wants to be legible, it wants to be approved, but the deeper self, the one emerging now, does not require translation. And that difference is seismic. Later that day at work, someone misinterprets his comment in a meeting. A year ago, he would have felt heat rise in his chest. He would have leaned forward, clarified his intention, adjusted his tone, ensured alignment. Today he pauses. He lets the misunderstanding sit in the room. Not out of pride, not out of defiance. Out of discernment. He senses internally whether correction is necessary, not to protect his image but to serve truth. The distinction is subtle, but it changes everything. This time correction feels unnecessary. The conversation moves on. And the world does not collapse. You can almost see it, the old wiring dissolving in real time, the compulsion to manage perception losing its voltage. What replaces it is not apathy. It is containment. He begins to realize something startling. Many of his explanations were never about clarity. They were about control. Control over how he was held in the minds of others. But identity cannot be controlled externally without cost. The cost was constant vigilance. Now vigilance is fatting. In the quiet of his office later that afternoon, he feels the full weight of this transformation. It is heavier than validation ever was. Because validation is light, fleeting, addictive. Sovereignty is dense. It anchors you in yourself in a way that can feel isolating at first. He senses a widening gap between who he is internally and how others may perceive him. And for the first time, the gap does not demand repair. That realization lands slowly. He may not be fully understood by everyone in his life. And that is no longer a threat. This is the subtle migration from seeking recognition to inhabiting oneself. But here, the tension that now emerges. If you no longer need to be understood, what happens to the relationships built on explanation? The afternoon light shifts across his desk, shadows lengthen. He leans back in his chair, feeling both liberated and uncertain. Because something deeper is beginning to surface. If the inner courtroom has dissolved, what else has been quietly waiting behind it? Thursday evening, 7:36 p.m. A long wooden table, low restaurant lighting, 4 friends mid-conversation. Glassware hums softly as someone sets it down too hard. A burst of laughter rises, then settles. He listens. Across the table, Daniel is telling a story, animated, expressive, reshaping details for effect. The others lean in, they nod at the right moments. They interrupt with shared memories that strengthen the narrative. There was a time he would have done the same, adjusted himself to the rhythm, timed his vulnerability so it landed well, softened sharp edges of opinion, added humor where truth felt too heavy. Tonight he doesn't. He speaks when he feels something real to say, and when he finishes, he doesn't monitor their faces for confirmation. A small silence follows one of his comments, not awkward, just unamplified. It passes, and no urgency rises in him to fill it. This is new. You can almost feel the old reflex hovering nearby like muscle memory. Clarify it, add context, make sure they understand what you meant. He lets the silence breathe instead. From a Jungian perspective, this is the ego relinquishing its role as negotiator of acceptance, not collapsing but maturing, the psyche no longer scrambling to maintain cohesion through external approval. It is a subtle form of psychological adulthood. But adulthood is not applause-filled. As the evening unfolds, he becomes aware of something else, a faint distance, not alienation, not superiority, just differentiation. He is no longer trying to synchronize his inner weather with the room. Years ago, harmony meant alignment at any cost. If someone misunderstood him, he would correct it immediately, as if his emotional survival depended on precision. Now he feels something steadier than harmony. Integrity. Integrity does not demand that everyone see you clearly, it asks only that you see yourself clearly. And clarity, he's realizing, doesn't require consensus. Daniel makes a playful jab at him, a half-accurate caricature of his personality. The table laughs lightly. The old version of him would have adjusted the image instantly. That's not really me. I'm not that serious. You're exaggerating. Tonight he smiles. Not because the description is accurate, but because it doesn't threaten him. He understands something now. People hold versions of you in their minds. Those versions are shaped by their needs, their projections, their limited vantage points. Correcting every version is an endless task. Releasing that task is freedom. Carl Jung believed that individuation requires withdrawing projections, both those we place on others and those we accept from them. To become whole, we must allow others to see us partially without scrambling to complete the picture. That is what is happening here. He lets them have their interpretation. It feels heavier than approval. He notices the quiet strength in withholding unnecessary correction. It's not passivity, it's discernment. Later, walking home alone under amber streetlights, he reflects on the evening. The air is cool, his footsteps echo faintly against the pavement. He realizes something else has shifted. He is no longer measuring connection by how accurately he is perceived. For years, intimacy meant being deeply understood. If someone misread him, he felt unseen. If they misunderstood his silence, he felt erased. Now he senses a more complex truth. No one will ever fully understand him. Not because he is mysterious, but because identity is layered, fluid, evolving. Even he does not fully understand himself at times. Why demand that others do? This realization is not cynical. It is stabilizing. He stops beneath a street lamp. The light casts a long shadow behind him. For a moment he studies it, elongated, slightly distorted. That shadow does not ask to be corrected. It simply exists. From a Jungian perspective, maturity involves integrating both light and shadow without compulsively editing either for public comfort. The integrated self does not chase validation because it no longer depends on fragmentation to be accepted. This is what sovereignty feels like in practice. Not loud, not isolating. Grounded. Yet as he resumes walking, another question quietly emerges. If you no longer need to be understood, do others begin to feel less necessary? The thought unsettles him. He does not want detachment, he does not want emotional distance, he values connection deeply. But he is beginning to sense that connection rooted in explanation is fragile. Connection rooted in presence might be something else entirely. He thinks of past relationships where he exhausted himself trying to be seen correctly, the late-night clarifications, the emotional footnotes, the constant effort to align narratives. He mistook effort for intimacy. Now effort feels optional. And that is both freeing and disorienting. Because when you stop performing for understanding, some relationships subtly shift. Conversations feel different, dynamics recalibrate. Some people lean closer. Others drift. He can feel that drift beginning in small ways, fewer attempts to correct him, fewer attempts from him to repair minor misreadings. The bond becomes quieter. Stronger or thinner. He isn't sure yet. The night deepens around him, the city hum softens. For the first time he senses that this shift, this refusal to chase understanding, is not the end of connection. It might be the beginning of a different kind. But that kind requires something even more confronting. To let people misunderstand you. And remain open anyway. He slows his pace. Because if he can stand without applause, can he also love without explanation? Sunday afternoon, 4:12 p.m. Rain moves softly against the windows. They are sitting on opposite ends of the couch, not in conflict, not in harmony either, just quiet. She scrolls through something on her phone. He watches the rain collect along the glass and slide downward in uneven lines. There was a time when this silence would have made him restless. He would have scanned the room for emotional temperature, interpreted her posture, analyzed the pauses between breaths. If she seemed distant, he would have leaned forward internally, preparing clarification. Are we okay? I didn't mean earlier to sound distant. I just want to make sure you understand where I'm coming from. He believed maintenance was love. Now he feels something more restrained. Not cold, not withdrawn. Contained. From a Jungian perspective, much of relational anxiety comes from projection. We project our fear of being unseen onto the other person and then attempt to manage their perception to soothe ourselves. We translate constantly as if love requires subtitles. But individuation changes that rhythm. When you begin to inhabit yourself fully, you stop outsourcing emotional stability to someone else's interpretation. She looks over at him, "You're quiet today." A year ago, that sentence would have triggered explanation. "I'm just thinking. I'm not upset. I'm not pulling away." Today he simply nods, "Yeah," and lets it stand. The rain continues. The silence stretches, but it does not fracture. You can almost feel the tension that would have existed before, the urgency to prevent misinterpretation, the subtle fear that being quiet might be mistaken for disinterest, that not clarifying might invite distance. But something steadier now anchors him. He no longer feels responsible for curating her understanding of him. That responsibility once felt like care, now it feels like control disguised as vulnerability. Carl Jung believed that the more we individuate, the less we cling to fusion. Fusion feels romantic, two people fully merged, perfectly attuned, but it often masks dependency on mutual mirroring. Real intimacy allows space. He senses this now in his body, a groundedness in letting her see him partially. She sets her phone down. "You seem different lately." There it is. The observation that once would have opened the courtroom again. Different how? Better explain before assumptions form. But instead of drafting a defense, he considers the statement quietly. Different. Yes. He meets her eyes. "I feel steadier." The answer is simple, unadorned. No elaboration follows. He notices her searching his face, not for flaws, not for threat, but for depth, and he allows her to search without guiding her toward a conclusion. This is new territory. To love without over-explaining is to trust that your presence is enough. And that trust is fragile at first. Because if she misunderstands him now, he may not rush to correct it. If she interprets his quiet as distance, he may allow the interpretation to exist without panic. This is not emotional negligence. It is emotional sovereignty. But sovereignty shifts dynamics. She leans back into the couch, absorbing the space between them. The air feels denser, not heavy but real. He senses a fork in the road that all mature relationships eventually face. Will this quiet strength deepen the bond? Or expose its reliance on constant reassurance? Rain intensifies briefly, drumming against the glass. He reflects on past loves where he over-articulated himself into exhaustion, where every mood required explanation, where every silence had to be decoded immediately. He thought transparency meant constant verbalization. Now he understands something subtler. Presence can be transparent without being verbose. From a Jungian perspective, when the ego loosens its need for affirmation, relationships must recalibrate. Some bonds are sustained by shared insecurity, by mutual reassurance loops. When one person steps out of that loop, the rhythm changes. She reaches for his hand. The gesture is small, unforced. He feels warmth, not relief, not validation, just warmth. And he realizes something quietly profound. He no longer loves to be understood. He loves to share space. There is a difference. Being understood centers you. Sharing space includes the other. The old hunger, "see me correctly," was self-focused, even when it looked vulnerable. This new steadiness makes room for her subjectivity, her projections, her interpretations. He no longer needs to manage them. That release creates space for something deeper than understanding. Mutual existence. The rain begins to slow, the room feels calmer. But beneath that calm lies another realization forming, one he hasn't fully faced yet. If he no longer needs to be understood by friends, if he no longer needs to be clarified in love, then who was he performing for all those years? The question lingers in the room long after the rain stops. Because the final layer of this transformation is not about others at all. It is about confronting the part of himself that believed he was only real when reflected. And that confrontation is still ahead. Tuesday night, 1:03 a.m. The city is asleep. He sits alone at his desk, the room lit by a single lamp. No messages, no conversations pending, no one observing him. Just the faint scratch of a pen against paper. He isn't journaling to be profound, he isn't crafting something to share. The words are unfinished, private, almost shapeless. And that's when it settles fully. This version of him exists even if no one ever confirms it. For most of his life, identity felt relational. He knew who he was by how others responded. The responsible one, the calm one, the thoughtful one, sometimes the misunderstood one. Each label, even the frustrating ones, gave him contour. But now, in this quiet room, there are no labels. No mirrors. No applause. And yet he feels more solid than ever. From a Jungian perspective, this is the deeper stage of individuation, not the rejection of society, not isolation, but the integration of self independent of constant reflection. The ego no longer feeds on validation to stabilize its shape. Instead, it rests on something internal. He leans back in his chair, the house makes soft settling noises, pipes hum, wood contracts, the ordinary symphony of night. There is no performance here. No one to misunderstand him. No one to understand him either. And strangely, that feels peaceful. For years, he believed that being deeply known was the ultimate form of security, that if someone truly saw him, fully grasped his nuance, his intentions, he would feel anchored. But anchoring yourself in someone else's comprehension is unstable. People shift, perceptions blur, narratives change. If your sense of self depends on external clarity, you will always be adjusting. Tonight he feels the opposite. Unadjusted. He thinks back to childhood moments when he first learned to explain himself, when a misunderstanding carried weight, when being misread felt dangerous. Perhaps that was when the inner courtroom was built. Clarify or be misjudged. Explain or be excluded. The strategy made sense then. But adulthood requires a different courage. The courage to let misinterpretation exist. Carl Jung believed that maturity is not about perfection but about wholeness, holding contradictions without fragmentation. When you are whole, you do not scramble to edit every shadow out of your image. You allow yourself to be complex. He realizes now that much of his past self-explanation was an attempt to be simplified, to make himself easier to digest. But depth is not always digestible. And not everyone is meant to fully metabolize you. The lamp casts a circle of warm light across the desk. Outside that circle, the room fades into shadow. He notices something symbolic in that. He no longer needs the entire room illuminated. He only needs enough light to see his own hands. There is a profound shift in no longer fearing partial visibility. He may be misunderstood by some. He may be fully understood by none. But he is no longer negotiating his existence to prevent that outcome. And here is the final realization, the one that changes everything. The need to be understood was once a survival mechanism. Now survival is no longer at stake. He is not disappearing if someone misreads him. He is not dissolving if someone fails to grasp his depth. He exists quietly, firmly, regardless. You can almost feel the psychological gravity of that truth. It doesn't inflate him, it humbles him. Because sovereignty is not superiority. It is self-containment. He closes the notebook, the sound is soft but decisive. For the first time in years, there is no internal voice asking, "Did I express that clearly enough?" There is only stillness. And in that stillness, something ancient and steady hums beneath the surface, an identity not constructed through applause, not defended through explanation, not validated through constant reflection. An identity that simply is. The city remains asleep. The world remains unaware of this quiet transformation. No announcement will be made, no one will congratulate him for stepping out of the mirror. But tomorrow, when someone misunderstands him, he will not rush to correct it. Not because he doesn't care, but because he finally knows who he is, even when no one else does.